Hi guys, today I'm going to do a beginner's watercolor of a sunset, and I'll go over the supplies as I use them, so hopefully it'll be easy for you to follow. And if you do decide to paint this demo today, I'd be really happy to see your results. So I'm going to start by just lightly spraying my paper. This is Arch's watercolor paper. And I drew 2 lines on it just so that I can keep my horizon line straight. Just one part way in at 4 inches and the other one 5 inches. And this is where I'm going to paint my islands and their reflections. So I'm going to start by using a bright lemon yellow and paint, oops, I didn't want to tape my paper down because it will buckle and I don't want it to pool into the middle of the paper, so this way it won't do that. But maybe I should give it one little piece of tape here so it doesn't move all over. So I'm going to start by just doing that, and give me a second to get that tape down so my paper's secure. Hopefully it'll tape down after I've sprayed it, just on the very edge there, because I don't want to waste any of the paper. Okay, so I have my nice bright lemon yellow center there. Now we don't want it to look like a target, so we'll mix that up in a little while. Next I'm putting in raw sienna. So remember, this is a sunset, and essentially the horizon's going to be around here somewhere, so there'll be reflections on the water and the sunset in the sky. And it doesn't, you don't have to be real careful with this, just get it down and let it bleed one color into the other. And you want it to be a little bit almost messy, because you don't want to make a circle per se. And now I'm going to add some Alizarin crimson. And you just let the colors flow into each other. Actually, I think I'm going to use a lighter pink here. And just keep going. A little bit of alizarin crimson as well. You can mix it up. Essentially you're using 3 primary colors. Let's mix that a bit there. Use a sponge to wipe my brush off. Now I don't want the edge to be too dark, so I'm going to bring this out a little bit so it's not all blue. And put some blue on the outer edge. See that circle there? I don't want that. Mix it up. And now some Ultramarine Blue. Again, let it mix it up. I threw a little red in here as well, which will give you a violety tone to the sky or the ocean, whichever part it happens to be at the time. You cover your whole paper. So it's not sopping wet, but it'll be damp when you do your next layer. One thing I like about this, makes it easy for beginners. There's no drawing. You just nice if you have a reference photograph of a sunset that you want to use, so that you have a bit of an idea where you're going with it. I take lots of photographs of sunsets, so I've always got lots of reference photographs, but it's not something I often paint. And get the edges done too. Looks a bit messy right now, but when you put in the islands and the trees and whatnot, it brings it together. Now I'm not going to put real dark. I could add some darker blues on the edges here, but I think I'll just leave it the way it is. And I can always go darker later if I want. Because if you start putting darks down too soon, you'll end up with too much dark, and then it's hard to get rid of it if you don't want it. And I'm just going to lightly spritz this. See that this is pooling in the center here, and I don't want that to happen. I'd like to keep that smoother. And you can see how this spray is giving a texture on the paper, which is nice as well. So I'll just charge that brush. Oops, that's a dirty brush, don't want to use that. If you're using light colors, you got to make sure your water's clean. I'm gonna just charge that a little bit, and hopefully it'll dry better. You don't want to have those blooms, as they're called. Sometimes they look nice, but it's not really what I'm going for. I'm going for more of a smooth and graduated transition rather than blooms on this sunset. A bit too much yellow in here. I'm gonna orange, change that a little bit. And a bit too much red. There, we're getting another bloom. Don't want that. You can avoid blooms by tilting your paper so that the paint flows evenly as it dries, which is something I might do off camera. You don't need to watch paint dry. So I'm going to come back when it's just damp and not as wet as it is. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that now. I let it dry a little bit, but it's still wet. So the paper will, the paint will disperse on the paper when I put it down. I'm going to use indigo to paint in my trees, and I strongly recommend you don't use black. I would recommend that you don't use black in any of your watercolor paintings. There's much nicer ways to get dark colors than using black. Black is just dull and looks like a hole when you're finished, not anything appealing. So this is just my line of the island of where I'm going to put my trees. Now I'm using a flat 3/4 inch brush, and this is what I'm going to use to paint in the trees. I'm going to use the edge of the brush, and I will start by putting in a few larger trees, and you can see the paint dispersing outwards as I put it down. So that's just the trunk of the tree, and I'll lighten up that trunk after in some spots. And then I'm just kind of going to go in and give it some branches. There, that worked nice. I used a fairly thick consistency of the indigo. Otherwise, it'll look really light when it dries. Watercolor dries a lot lighter than when you first put it down. So just little kind of U or V-shaped branches, and make sure you leave some spaces in between where the sun can shine through so you can see your beautiful watercolor. And vary the length and distance apart of your trees so they're not all the same. Variety is always nice in a painting. If you do everything the same, it's just not so appealing. Probably draw it as a line, I guess. And I'm filling in the bottom a little bit more because you're going to have underbrush there that's going to stop the light from coming through. And one last little guy over here. You want your paint mixed in advance for doing this because it can dry quite quickly, and you want to this to have the effect of it blending into the background there a bit. And you can only get that with wet paper. Okay, and I'm going to do a couple littler guys coming off here. Got a bit wind blown. And use the tip of your flat brush to do smaller branches. And do one little guy back here. And another little fella that's off here. And I think I want to make my island just a little deeper. Okay, that's getting a bit dry, so you want to get your reflections in there before it gets too dry. And I'm actually going to use a bit lighter mixture of the indigo so that it's not quite so stark black. And I'm going to start it down here a little bit. And I'm not going to be quite so careful with the forming of the trees. They're reflections after all, so I can see my paper's kind of dry there. So the solution to that is to just spritz it a little bit with your spray bottle. Not too much. And line your trunks up with the ones that you have above. There's a fairly large one there. And it's a mirror image, so there I did V's upwards, and here I did V's downward, and here I'm doing them upwards, but you don't have to be exact on this. Nobody's gonna notice. Besides, the water would have distorted it somewhat. That one's quite a bit darker. There's some more paint on it. Okay, now I'm just going to do the trunks in here. Okay, so when this dries a little bit, I'm going to come back and lighten the trunks. So while I'm letting this dry a little bit, I'm going to put in the island on this side. And I'm going to do that after I draw my line here so I know where the trees are supposed to go and I don't get it crooked. And I'm going to do that with this little sponge, and you can still use your brush if you don't have a sponge, but I like using the little sponge once in a while. It makes nice shapes. So we'll get her at her here. Again, I'm using the indigo because your trees in sunset aren't going to have much color to them, that's for sure. Now these trees are further in the distance, so they're going to be a little bit smaller. If you let if the paint's too wet on your sponge, it'll pool like that, and that's not the effect we're going for. I want more of a spotty type like that. But I can fix that up later. Again, do it randomly so not all your trees are the same shape. And as it gets over to the edge, I make them smaller, because in nature they usually are smaller over at the edge. And these guys can be a little bit bigger. And once that dries a little bit, I'll go back in and add some more texture there. Okay, so now I'm going to do the shadow of that, but I'm going to do shorter shadows. And remember to do them in the mirror image of what's above you. And it's the angle of the sun that's making them shorter, plus on this side of the island. Fix these guys up a little bit too while I'm at it. A little more texture to them. I like that better. The paper's still pretty wet here. Fill this in a little bit. Okay, looking good so far. So I'm going to let that dry a little bit more still, and I'll be back to put in those trunks. So I like the way this is turning out thus far. Let's have a test, see if it's dry enough to put in the trunks. What you're going to do is you're going to scrape it away, scrape some of the paint away with a flat brush. I chose a smaller one than I used to paint them with because I only want little sections to be taken off. So let's give it a try. It might fill back up with paint. If it does, it's still too wet. But we just want a hint of the trunks. We don't want great big patches of white paint. That seems to be working pretty good. And wash your paint off each time because you don't want to go back and put paint back in. You can do it in the branch too, although I think that might be a bit too wet. Worked better that time. And I guess I'll do it down here a little bit too. It's very subtle, you don't want it to be too obvious. Now over here I'm going to do the opposite. I'm just going to extend the trunk there a little bit because we've got gaps and the tree would fall over if it didn't have a trunk. Good. So now what I'm going to do is put in a foreground with some grasses and shrubs and whatnot. And again, I'll just use the little sponge and some indigo. I'm going to do some lighter grasses in the center once I get there. But to start, I'm just going to start by putting them in roughly. We'll add to this as we go. Again, do it randomly so that they're not all the same. I'm going to be blocking off the top of my trees here, but that's okay too. Didn't really like the way it was ending there, that little island, so this is fine. And foreground here, so we'll come around a little bit more. I'll put some more back in here once that dries. It's a little bit wet right now. Okay, so now the way that I'm going to form some grasses is to use what's called a rigger brush, which is just a really slim, long brush. And when you flick it, it makes lovely little grasses. So this is what I mean by flicking. Again, random. You can see where the paper's still wet here. It's blending into the background, which is okay for some, but I also want some to be pretty distinct and sharp. I'm going to use a green, sap green, and do some a few green grasses in the front here because the sun's shining pretty bright on them. But again, they're going to be pretty subtle, so you don't want them to stand out like too much. And some of the indigo from below will mix in, so they won't be too bright. Just a little hint. I still want to fix these shrubs over here. Can make them almost like trees. Okay. Okay, we're almost done, but you can't have an ocean or a lake scene without a couple little birds in it. So let's put a couple little birds flying away, or flying towards us, you can't really tell. Up here in the sunset, the bright sun, just a little hint of a bird, and he needs a buddy, a little bit smaller because he's a little bit further away. And then their mirror image in the water, which is going to be something like this, and this guy something like, did I do that one backwards? Yes, I did. So, need him to go this way. Good. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you try it out for yourself. Not hard to do, and as you can see, it doesn't take too long either. So thanks for watching my channel, and I hope you subscribe, and that I'll see you back again here soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.